jury has returned.
State of Iowa plaintiff versus Mark Stanton Curtis, defendant. Form number 1 as to count 1, we the jury find the defendant, Mark Stanton Curtis, guilty of sexual abuse in the 3rd degree as charged in the trial information. Count 2, form number 1, we the jury find the defendant, Mark Stanton Curtis, guilty of burglary in the 1st degree as charged in the trial information. Signed, Lorraine J. Comito, foreman.
29-årige Mark Curtis från Des Moines, delstaten Iowa i USA, döms här till 25 års fängelse för sexuellt övergrepp och inbrott. Men är han utsatt för en komplott döms han i själva verket för sin fackliga och politiska verksamhet. God afton och välkommen till 8 dagar. Som tittare kan ni själv bilda en uppfattning om fallet Curtis. Vi har bilderna från rättegångssalen. Och vi diskuterar också varför USA har haft och alltjämt har en så svag, splittrad och förföljd fackföreningsrörelse. Med oss i studion är ordförande Livsmedelsarbetarförbundet Lage Andreasson. Med fallet Mark Curtis, den 29-åriga amerikan som i slutet av förra året dömdes till 25 års fängelse för sexuellt övergrepp och inbrott. Marks omgivning hävdar att han utsatts för en komplott. Han dömdes i själva verket för sin socialistiska uppfattning och för sin fackliga aktivitet bland arbetskamraterna på en slakterifabrik i staden Des Moines, delstaten Iowa. Här är historien om fallet Curtis, berättad av det amerikanska tv-bolaget Republican Picture i Los Angeles.
On the evening of Friday, March 14th, 1988, a 15-year-old black girl claims someone came to the front door of this home in a working-class Des Moines neighborhood, allegedly forced his way in and began to assault her. The alleged victim's identity must be concealed by court order.
He closed the door behind him and threatened. He said, "I have a knife. I hurt your brother and you if you don't cooperate."
The girl called for help and her 11-year-old brother dialed 911.
Why are you whispering? He's doing what to your sister? Does she know who he is? We'll have somebody stop there.
Officers arrested 29-year-old Mark Curtis inside the house. The arrest sparked a worldwide storm of protest. Mark Curtis, avowed socialist and active union member, was employed by the Swift Independent Packing Company. At the time of his arrest, he was involved in a dispute charging the company with exploiting immigrant laborers. Mark Curtis's supporters were convinced that he was innocent and that the charges against him were brought on by his labor and political activities. They formed a defense committee and enlisted the support of political, labor, and farm activists across the world. Mark Curtis is charged with first-degree burglary and third-degree sexual assault. He faces a maximum sentence of 35 years in prison. The prosecution calls the 15-year-old victim of the alleged sexual attack. Because of her age and the nature of the charge, her name is being withheld and her...
Did you recognize the person that was there?
No.
His notice about him.
I noticed that he had a smelly odor on his breath.
What did it smell like?
Combination of alcohol and cigarettes mixed together.
What happened next?
While we're talking, Jason, I went on back into the house. Left me out there on the porch by myself. Then last question he asked me was, well, is your mother and father home? And that time he was still wobbling his head back and forth to look into the house when he asked that question.
What happened then?
Well, he kind of turned around, so I started to close the door. But I felt a push on the other side. He had approached the door and pushed it open with his hand. He closed the door behind him and threatened. He said, "I have a knife. I hurt your brother and you if you don't cooperate." He started rubbing my breast and my back.
And what happened then?
When he had told me to get down on the floor, and I didn't respond, so he pushed me down onto the floor. He started to unbutton my pants and started to pull my jeans off.
And what did you do?
What did I do? I closed my legs and rolled over.
What happened then?
He rolled me back onto the mat, to my back. He took his fist and had punched me in the forehead because I wouldn't take my jeans off as he requested. By that time, He started unbuckling his belt and unbuttoning his pants that he had on, and unzipped his zipper.
Did you see him do this?
Yes, I did.
What happened then?
He told me, "Take your panties off, you bitch." That's literally what he said.
What happened then?
I was on my back. I yelled out for Jason twice. I said, "Jason, Jason, help me."
What happened next?
I heard a knock at the door again. I had persisted to get up on my knees, try to reach the door. Before I could do that, he had took his hand and started choking me and told me don't say anything. Then I asked who it was, and they said the police.
What happened?
I opened the door, and I ran out.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Defense attorney Mark Pennington cross-examines. He questions her about the time of the incident.
We realize if someone was there at 7:35, that person could not have been Mark Curtis.
I don't know that.
Are you sure that the individual that attacked you had a belt?
Yes, I could hear it when he was taking it off.
So there would have been a belt seized at the scene then, would there not?
Yeah,
Excuse me?
yeah.
You're pretty sure that the individual who attacked you or who certainly came to your door had smoke on his breath?
Yes, you could smell it. I could.
I take it you've been around other people that smoke and know what that smell is like.
Yeah.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you, Miss.
Officer Joe Gonzalez was one of 2 officers dispatched to the victim's house in response to the 911 call. He testifies about what happened when he arrived.
After the young girl jumped out wearing the light-colored sweatshirt, what did you do?
At that time when she jumped out, I noticed somebody else on the porch.
Could you tell definitely who this person was at that time?
Yes.
What was that person doing?
He was pulling up his pants.
What happened then?
The young girl yelled, "He just raped me."
Then what happened?
The man inside took off running.
And what did you do?
I took off running after him.
What happened inside the house?
I caught up with the man in the back bedroom.
What happened then?
After I handcuffed him, I advised him to reach down with his hands and pull his pants up, hold on to him, and then I had him sit down on the bed.
What happened then?
He asked me, "What do you have on me so far?"
And did you respond to that?
Yes, I did.
And what did you say?
I said, "You're under arrest for sexual abuse."
Thank you. I have no further questions.
The car.
Mark Pennington cross-examines about the belt mentioned by the alleged victim.
Officer Gonzalez, you didn't retrieve a belt from Mr. Curtis, did you?
No.
Prosecution witness Paul Bush is a forensic specialist with the Des Moines Police Department. He examined Mark Curtis's clothes for evidence of sexual contact with the alleged victim.
What were the results of your analysis?
As far as these items of clothing are concerned, no seminal fluid was detected.
11.
The witness went on to testify that in the examination of the victim's clothing, no seminal fluid or pubic hair other than her own were found. The defense then cross-examines about the significance of this evidence.
Can you tell me how that bit of evidence, which you testified earlier, in any way connects this Caucasian, Mr. Curtis, to a sexual attack on...
That evidence, as far as I'm concerned, does not tie either two together. That's all.
Although you found no seminal fluid or hairs transferred between Mr. Curtis and that does not mean they did not have sexual contact.
Yes, that's correct. I do not know whether or not sexual contact took place. It may or may not have.
Nothing further.
Well, determining whether they may or may not have, Mr. Bush, there certainly is nothing in your report on any of the tests you completed which indicates that Mark Curtis had sexual contact with... Yes or no?
There was nothing there that I noted to tie the two individuals together as far as seminal fluid or hair is concerned.
I have nothing further on. What is his attitude towards women?
He's very solicitous of women, respectfully, not patronizing. He understands that the second citizenship that women face under the society, and he respects what women have to say.
Have you ever seen any sign, as a wife might see, of any sign of antipathy or animosity towards blacks?
Never. We are anti-racist to the core. We fight against racism in our daily lives.
Ever known Mark Curtis to smoke cigarettes?
He is a non-smoker. He gets on my case because I am a smoker.
Thank you.
Defense witness Rose Floyd is a fellow union member and a friend of Mark Curtis.
Do you have any reason to believe that Mark Curtis is a violent individual?
No, I don't. I actually have reason to believe the contrary, that Mark is a person who is very concerned about people, and particularly people with extra problems. I mean, I'm speaking of blacks, women, people who face particular hardships. And I also know him personally just to be a very calm person and concerned about other people's feelings.
On the night of the incident, Rose Floyd says she received a phone call from the defendant. The victim has testified that Mark Curtis arrived at her home at 7:35 and stayed there until just before 10.
When was the first call, if you know?
The first call was around 8:45.
Tell the jury why you believe that it was at 8:45 as opposed to some other time.
Well, I'm pretty certain that it was around 8:45 because at the time he called me, as I said, I was awakened. And I worked midnight, so it was natural for me to want to know how much more time I had to sleep before I got up to go to work. And so I say around 8:45 because it could have been a little before because I looked after the call.
So by the time when you hung up the phone, you looked at the clock, it was 8:45.
Yes.
The second call must have been after Mr. Curtis was arrested?
He called me from jail.
That's all I have on direct.
Brian Willey is another friend of Mark Curtis. He claims to have actually been with the defendant part of the time on the night the incident was alleged to have taken place.
Brian, did you see Mark Curtis on that night?
Later on, he came in, yeah, about 7 o'clock.
Okay. How long was Mark there?
I think he left around 8:30.
Why do you think he left at 8:30?
Because I had to meet some people at 9 o'clock, so I kept looking at my watch. You know, and I figured, well, I've got another picture here, so I might as well, stay until 9.
By the way, did Mark Curtis smoke that night?
No, I didn't even know he smoked.
Ever seen him smoke?
No.
Do you smoke?
I smoke, yeah.
Your friend smokes?
Right.
Prosecution cross-examines.
Mr. Willey, then it is your testimony that Mark Curtis was drinking some beer that Friday evening.
We had a couple of them.
Okay. Thank you. Nothing further.
I would call Mark Curtis.
Defendant Mark Curtis takes the stand. He began his testimony by stating that a frightened young woman stopped him on the street and asked him to drive her home because a man was chasing her. He said he waited on the enclosed porch while she went inside.
What happened?
Well, I heard a noise behind me, a bam, as the door flew open.
What'd you do?
Well, the first thing that went through my head was that this was the guy who was after her. And I jumped into her house, afraid of this guy who was behind me. But it wasn't this guy. It wasn't the guy I had expected her friend to be, or her. It was the police officers.
What happened?
One of them grabbed me by the arm and said, "I've got him." At this point, I thought that there might be a misunderstanding here, that in fact she had called the police worried about this guy who was after her, and that the police officers thought that I was the guy.
What happened?
Well, he grabbed me by the elbow and walked me through the living room into this bedroom here in the back of the house. He handcuffed me, my wrists behind my back, turned me around, sat me down on this bed that was there. He pushed me back onto the bed, and he unbuckled my pants and pulled them down.
Did you say anything to him?
I said, "What are you doing to me?" And he said, "Let's see what we've got here. Let's see what you've done."
What happened then?
Then he told me that I was under arrest, that I had the right to remain silent, and so on.
Were you wearing a belt?
No.
Did you assault on March 4th, 1988?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Have you ever in your life ever molested any female under any circumstances?
Never. I never have, and I never will.
You're telling this jury you're innocent?
Yes, I am innocent.
That's all on direct.
The prosecution cross-examines.
Mr. Curtis, you've told this jury you're an honest person, is that right?
That's right.
Could you tell the jury why you left Hayes International in 1985?
Yes, I was fired from Hayes International.
Isn't it true that you were fired because you falsified your application?
No, that's not the case at all.
And isn't it true that you put down on an application that you had prior experience in companies that did not exist?
I did do that.
And you lied on that document then?
This was during the height of the recession, and I put down a little extra experience to help me get that job.
Mr. Curtis, isn't it true when you couldn't find Benita or Keith, then you raped?
Not true at all.
And didn't you throw to the ground?
None of that happened. At least it was not done by me if it did happen.
And you hit her in the eye and the forehead?
Also not true.
You took off her clothes?
Just run down the whole list and I'll tell you that it's not so.
So when testified that you are the person that raped her, she's lying?
You know, I heard her like you did, like we all did, and I believe something may have happened to her, maybe even what she said. But I was not that person, and she is wrong about that much.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Both sides have rested. Let's listen to a portion of the closing arguments.
If it's a frame-up, why not plant a knife on the defendant or on the porch? Why pick a sexual abuse case? There's no ejaculation, there's no transfer of pubic hairs. Instead, wouldn't it be much easier if there was a frame, a conspiracy, to pick a drug case? Stop the defendant and throw a bunch of drugs in there and call him the worst drug dealer to hit Des Moines. Wouldn't that be a lot easier? The credible, believable evidence in this case, you will judge. The law commands you to search for the truth, and the state is confident that you will, and find the defendant guilty of burglary in the first degree and sexual abuse in the third degree.
This is a unique case. It's unique that we're before you and there's substantial evidence in the record. I'm not stupid, but I'm telling you this man is innocent. Your job is not to convict. Your job is to just find out what happened. And if you don't know what happened, if you have a doubt about what happened, the law says you must follow your oath and acquit Mark Curtis. After I sit down, no one is ever again going to speak on his behalf to you. I don't know what you'll say, but I'm asking you to please consider this evidence. I'm asking you to acquit Mark Curtis. Thank you.
The jury has returned.
State of Iowa Plaintiff versus Mark Stanton Curtis, defendant. Form number 1, as to count 1, we the jury find the defendant, Mark Stanton Curtis, guilty of sexual abuse in the third degree as charged in the trial information. Count 2, form number 1, we the jury find the defendant, Mark Stanton Curtis, guilty of burglary in the first degree as charged in the trial information. Signed, Lorraine J. Comito, foreman.
Mark Curtis has been found guilty of first-degree burglary and third-degree sexual assault. He could be sentenced to as much as 35 years in prison.
I'm going to excuse the jury now. Thank you for your service in this case. You're excused until next Monday morning.
Mark Curtis dömdes till 25 års fängelse, men affären går vidare. Domen är överklagad. Runt om i världen, också i Sverige, har det bildats stödkommittéer för Mark Curtis. Här talar kommunistisk ungdomsordförande Stellan Hermansson på ett möte i Stockholm. I stödkommittén ingår bland andra den socialdemokratiska riksdagsmannen och advokaten Hans-Göran Frank och professorn i civilrätt Anna Kristensson. Mark Curtis hustru, Kate Kako, som besökte Sverige nyligen, är säker på att hennes make har dömts för sin fackliga och politiska verksamhet.
For that and more, because of the conditions of workers in the United States, because of the offensive that the companies are on against our conditions of work, or against our rights to unionize, to be represented by unions in the United States, people like Mark come into direct contact with the management and with the police because of his activities around those issues for the rights of workers.
But do you have any examples that he has been politically persecuted before this case?
Yes. The FBI has been on a 5-year spying operation against the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. And this committee is the largest anti-war committee in the United States. And it's composed of church people, trade unionists, political people. And because of its stance against U.S. policies in Central America, they've been spying on that organization against trying to find any kind of terrorist activity on the part of this organization.
But how come that you are so sure that it is because of political reason and not because he's guilty to sexual abuse and burglary, for example?
Well, because of who Mark is. Because Mark is a long-time socialist. Because he fights for the rights of workers. And if you look at his standing, his consistent fight for the betterment of humanity as a whole, and his sense of wanting to, you know, have social justice in the United States, it's impossible that anybody like that.
What's the next step? I think you have appealed the sentence.
Yes, we're in the process of appealing the unjust trial and the conviction, which will be months in the future because of the long process of the judicial justice system in the United States. We're also in the process of suing the police department for beating Mark up.
Ja, utan att kvälja dom i fallet Curtis så kan man ändå göra några reflektioner. Även om man skulle ha gjort sig skyldig till någon form av sexuellt övervåld och inbrott så förefaller ju domen 25 års fängelse orimligt hård för en svensk bedömare. Likaså kvarstår flera oklara punkter efter rättegången. Enligt vittnesmålen så kunde ju Mark Curtis inte ha befunnit sig i den här 15-åriga flickans hus vid den uppgivna tidpunkten. Och inte heller bar han livrem eller luktade rök som den man gjorde som sades ha angripit flickan. Laga Andreasson, du är ordförande i Svenska livsmedelsarbetarförbundet. Det är alltså motsvarigt till det förbund som Curtis tillhör i USA. Har ni granskat det här fallet?
Ja, men inte mer än vad som framgår av den här filmen. Vi har ju träffat den här företrädare för den här kommittén och de har satt oss in i problemet.
Ni planerar ingen stödaktion?
Nej, det har vi inte bestämt oss för, men jag tycker vår inställning är ju den att bortsett var nu skulden kan ligga någonstans så måste det vara motiverat att han får en ny rättegång.
Ja, historien känner ju dessutom många exempel på fackligt förföljda. Vi har svenska agitatorn Joe Hill som ju sannolikt utsatts för justitiemål för 75 år sedan. Om man ser mer allmänt nu på det här med den svaga fackföreningsrörelsen i USA. Mindre än 20% av arbetskraften är organiserad. Vad beror det här på?
Dessutom kan man se en kraftig tillbakagång. På 50-talet så låg de, tror jag, på en 35%.
Och nu under 20?
Ja, 17 ungefär tror jag det ligger på idag.
Varför?
Ja, det är en intressant fråga. Jag tror att man får se den amerikanska fackföreningsrörelsen som en slags spegelbild till det samhälle den befinner sig i. Och ser man på utvecklingen med en mycket kraftig fattigdom som finns för närvarande, en hög arbetslöshet, antifackliga lagar stiftas i Amerika för att hålla fackföreningsrörelsen på mattan. Jag tror nästan man försöker driva att det är oamerikanskt att vara organiserad överhuvudtaget i Amerika. Så att hela den enorma tryck som finns på den fackföreningsrörelsen som i sig har gått i stå, som inte har kunnat utveckla sig utan har stagnerat. Och de förlorar alltså medlemmar i ett samhälle där arbetskraften utökas väldigt kraftigt. Så att
det är populärt att skylla på Ronald Reagan. Han fick under sin president i titeln fackets fiende nummer 1. Men det är väl att göra lite väl enkelt för sig. Problemet är ju inte än så.
Det är möjligt. Jag menar, man har ju stiftat lagar där det är tillåtet nu att ersätta strejkande med annan arbetskraft och så vidare. Som den minimilönelag som finns och som man har lagt fast och inte ökat på sin 81. Det gör ju också att förhandlingsutrymmet krymper och så vidare. Så att det finns naturligtvis spår av Reagan-politiken i detta här. Det ska inte förnekas. Men jag tror också att fackföreningsrörelsen självt har inte i god tid sitt hus.
Du menar